A police officer hands a child back to a serial killer. The child had escaped, had a hole drilled in his skull, and the cop just let him go. Welcome to Obscura Files. If this is your first time here, subscribe, because we don't do this lightly. These are the people who looked perfectly normal while doing things that should be impossible to hide. Some of them fooled entire cities. Some of them fooled the police. One of them fooled a judge into letting him be his own lawyer, and another one dressed as a clown on weekends. Let's go. Jeffrey Dahmer didn't just kill people. That would almost be too simple. What Dahmer was doing over years in a regular apartment in a regular city was something so layered and disturbing that even seasoned investigators struggled to process the scene when they finally found it. Dahmer targeted primarily young black men and boys, luring them back to his Milwaukee apartment under various pretexts. Once there, he would drug their drinks and do whatever he pleased. But the killing was just the beginning. After his victims died, Dahmer would dismember their bodies and keep parts, skulls, hands, genitals, stored around his apartment like a private museum of horror. He ate parts of some of them. He genuinely believed that consuming them was a way of keeping them close, making them a permanent part of them. But the part that really doesn't leave you, the part that sits in the back of your mind, is what he tried to do while some of them were still alive. Dahmer experimented on certain victims by drilling holes into their skulls and injecting chemicals directly into their brains. His goal, as insane as it sounds, was to create a kind of living zombie, someone who would stay with him, someone who couldn't leave.
And here's the detail that changes everything. One of his victims actually escaped. A 14-year-old boy, disoriented, bleeding, made it out onto the street. Neighbors called the police. Officers arrived, and Dahmer, calm, charming, completely composed, told them the boy was his drunk boyfriend. The officers handed the child back to him. That night, Dahmer killed him. It wasn't until 1991 that another victim managed to escape, with handcuffs still on his wrists, and flagged down a police car, that the whole thing finally unraveled. When investigators entered the apartment, they found photographs, preserved skulls, decomposing body parts in a barrel, and a refrigerator containing human remains. Dahmer was convicted of 15 murders, though he confessed to more. He was sentenced to life in prison, where he was beaten to death by a fellow inmate in 1994. Now, before we move on, and we're going to get into someone whose identity has never been confirmed to this day, I want to ask you something, and I genuinely want you to answer this in the comments. Which of these cases do you think could have been stopped earlier, and what would it have taken? Because as we go through this list, a pattern starts to emerge that I think you'll notice yourself. Jack the Ripper operated in 1888 in the Whitechapel district of London, one of the poorest, most overcrowded areas of the city. His victims were women working as prostitutes, women who had almost no social protection, and who most of the authorities at the time felt didn't deserve much investigation. That attitude, as cold as it is part of why he was never caught. 5 confirmed victims. 5 murders carried out with what medical examiners described as unusual anatomical precision. Internal organs removed, in some cases taken entirely from the scene. The question of whether the killer had surgical training became one of the most debated aspects of the case, and the newspapers of the day ran with it completely. Here's what made the Ripper different from almost anything before it: the media. In 1888, there was no television, no radio, no internet. Information traveled through newspapers and word of mouth, which meant rumors became facts and facts became legends almost overnight. The papers described the surgical precision of the murders in vivid detail. They published letters allegedly written by the killer, taunting, theatrical letters, some of which may have been hoaxes, some of which may not have been. A city that had no framework for understanding what a serial killer even was suddenly had to process the idea that someone intelligent, possibly educated, possibly wealthy, was hunting women in the dark. The panic was unlike anything London had seen. People speculated that the killer could be a doctor, a butcher, a member of the aristocracy. Some thought he was supernatural, a vampire, a spirit punishing the immoral.
The police were overwhelmed. They had no forensic tools, no criminal profiling, no DNA. They had witness descriptions that contradicted each other and a press that was making everything worse. More than 100 years later, and after dozens of serious suspects have been proposed, including a Polish barber, a cotton merchant, and even a member of the royal family, Jack the Ripper has never been definitively identified. The case remains officially unsolved. And somehow, that's the most unsettling part.
Ted Bundy is one of the most studied killers in criminal history, and the reason people study him so obsessively is the same reason he was so dangerous. He was genuinely difficult to read. Not because he was quiet or reclusive, but because he was the opposite. Bundy was charming. He was good-looking. He was articulate. He worked on political campaigns. He volunteered at a suicide prevention hotline. He was the person you'd trust. Between 1974 and 1978, Bundy murdered at least 30 women and girls across multiple states, though the true number may be higher, since he never gave a full, reliable confession. His method was consistent. He would approach victims in public spaces, sometimes wearing a fake cast or pretending to struggle with crutches or a sling, asking for help carrying something to his car. The moment of apparent vulnerability was the trap. Once victims were close enough to his vehicle, he would attack. What Bundy understood, and what made him so effective and so terrifying, was that people's instinct to help someone in distress could be weaponized. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like someone who needed assistance, and by the time his victims realized what was happening, it was too late. His crimes were brutal. He decapitated at least 12 of his victims and kept their severed heads. He returned to crime scenes to engage in necrophilia. He was meticulous about evidence, careful about witnesses, and strategic about when and where he struck. When he was finally caught and put on trial in Florida, Bundy did something extraordinary. He fired his legal team and chose to represent himself. He cross-examined witnesses. He made legal arguments. He played the part of a misunderstood man being railroaded by a system that had already decided he was guilty. It didn't work. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and he was convicted and sentenced to death. He was executed in 1989. In his final interviews, he blamed pornography. He blamed a difficult childhood. He spent the very last moments of his life trying to construct a narrative where he was also a victim. It didn't land. The Zodiac Killer is one of those cases where the horror isn't just in the murders, it's in the performance around them. The Zodiac didn't just kill people. He wanted everyone to know about it. He wanted to be famous. He wanted to be feared. And he wanted to prove that he was smarter than the police. The confirmed killings began in December of 1968, when 2 teenagers were shot in a car on a remote road near Benicia, California. Over the following year, more attacks followed, always in relatively isolated areas, always targeting couples or individuals in quiet places, and always followed by letters. The letters went to newspapers, to police departments, sometimes to specific journalists. They were detailed. They referenced the crimes in ways only the actual killer could know. They included ciphers, coded messages that the Zodiac claimed would reveal his identity if solved. Some of those ciphers have been solved. One remains unsolved to this day. The Zodiac claimed to have killed 37 people. Investigators have only been able to confirm 5. Who the others are, or whether they even exist, is unknown. Despite hundreds of suspects, extensive investigation, and eventually DNA evidence that pointed towards certain individuals, no one has ever been charged with the Zodiac killings. The case is still officially open. What makes the Zodiac uniquely disturbing is the intentionality of it all. He didn't kill out of compulsion or desperation. He killed because he wanted an audience. And in a sense, he got one that has lasted more than 50 years. John Wayne Gacy is proof that the mask people wear in public can be almost completely disconnected from what they're doing in private. During the day, Gacy was a successful building contractor. He was active in his local community in Norwood Park, Illinois. He organized neighborhood events, attended political fundraisers, and volunteered as a children's entertainer, a character he called Pogo the Clown, who performed at hospitals and birthday parties. Between 1972 and 1978,
Gacy lured at least 33 young men and boys to his home, most of them responding to advertisements he placed for construction work. Once inside his house, he would assault, strangle, or asphyxiate them. 26 of his victims were buried in the crawl space beneath his house. Others were disposed of in a nearby river. The investigation that finally brought him down began when a teenage boy he had hired disappeared. Police obtained a search warrant for his property. When they entered the crawl space, they found the remains. They kept digging, and they kept finding more. Gacy had kept diaries recording his crimes. He had kept souvenirs from victims. He had, by all accounts, genuinely enjoyed what he was doing, treating it as a kind of sport, a private collection of horrors that ran parallel to his normal-looking life. He was convicted of 33 murders in 1980, sentenced to death, and executed by lethal injection in 1994. These were 6 cases.
Charles Manson never personally killed anyone. That fact is important because it's exactly what made him so remarkable as a case study in manipulation and control. Manson built a following, a group of mostly young women and a handful of men who came to be known as the Manson family through a combination of charisma, psychological manipulation, isolation, and an ideology that blended apocalyptic racial theory with cult-like devotion to Manson himself. By the late 1960s, Manson had developed what he called helter-skelter, a theory that a race war was imminent, that Black Americans would rise up and kill white people en masse, and that Manson and his followers would hide underground and emerge afterward to rule the survivors. To accelerate this war, Manson ordered his followers to commit murders and make them look like they were carried out by Black militants. In August of 1969, members of the Manson family entered the home of actress Sharon Tate in Los Angeles and killed her along with 4 others. Tate was 8.5 months pregnant. The following night, the group killed Lino and Rosemary LaBianca in their home, leaving phrases written in blood on the walls, designed to look like the work of a Black radical group. Manson was arrested, tried, and convicted of conspiracy to commit murder. He was sentenced to death, but California abolished the death penalty temporarily in 1972, converting his sentence to life in prison. He died there in 2017, having spent nearly 5 decades incarcerated, never showing anything resembling genuine remorse. Ed Gein is, in many ways, the origin point. Not because he killed the most people. He didn't.